Hello, true duelists, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History, the series where I talk about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that didn't. Today's card, the lavalval chain for the Link era, Curious, the Lightsworn Dominion. Curious was first released in Extreme Force in 2018 as a super rare, and as of this video, that's the only printing it's received to date. For the time on the ban list, it's a classic case of going from 3 to none, going from unlimited on release until its banning on the December 2022 ban list. A light attribute warrior type Link 3 monster with 2400 attack and arrows pointing up, bottom left and bottom right. The materials needed to summon it are any 3 monsters with the same attributes but different types, and its effect reads: if this face-up card is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect while its owner controls it, you can target one card in your graveyard, add it to your hand. You can only use each of the following effects of Curious the Lightsworn Dominion once per turn. If this card is link summoned, you can send one card from your deck to the graveyard. If a card or cards is sent from your deck to the grave by an effect, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Curious, also known as lavalval to no one except for me right now as I speak, is the type of card that you can read and go, yeah, that'll probably be banned soon enough. Or at least that's what I always thought, because what you're looking at is an extra deck monster that can send any card in your deck right to the graveyard. The last card that had that with a meaningful presence was of course lavalval Chain, and that shit's hella banned even to this day, which I hope remains true moving forward, because as single card histories have taught me, every time I say it's probably not moving, it inevitably moves. This wasn't nearly as easy to make as lavalval Chain was, however, but it did offer some other bonuses that the Chain couldn't to make up for it, if you will. For one example, this card's first effect to send a card from your deck to the graveyard does trigger the second effect to mill 3, so effectively you get to mill 4, but the first card you mill is whatever you choose to mill. Not too shabby. Out of the gate, the card did see some amount of play, because That Grass Looks Greener was legal when this card released, and that means we get to look at some more 60 card piles. Because to no shock, the decks that wanted as many cards in the graveyard as possible played Curious to help accomplish that goal, seeing as how Curious puts more cards in the graveyard. The materials to make didn't always line up in the easiest of ways on release, depending on which exact deck was being played, but regardless, it was a great way to ensure you got one extra specific card into the graveyard if needed. If the player hadn't been able to otherwise get a copy of Fairy Tale Snow into the graveyard through one means or another, or maybe you wanted one of your various Shaddoll cards if you played a large Shaddoll package. Maybe you were playing a dinosaur package and just needed one more dinosaur in the grave to turn on a copy of UCT. The chances are endless. I haven't even mentioned the card Mizuki, mostly because it's Mizuki. But still, whatever it is they were wanting to get into the graveyard, if they hadn't previously been able to, Curious was a very easy way to do so, on top of the additional mill 3 to get even more things in the graveyard. Regardless of what they wanted, Lord knows that they were playing enough cards to get into the graveyard that it was never a bad thing to make in those various decks. Broadly speaking, 60 card decks died off for a time, at least after the banning of grass, or at the very least these grass-esque, just generic grave piles did. Curious, meanwhile, would still see play, moving on to more fun and interactive decks, like Gem Knight FTK. Yeah, fun and interactive in the sense that I said that word facetiously, because I don't know, comedy? Gem Knight FTK is exactly what it sounds like, using the Gem Knights to FTK. The more you know. Abusing the effect of Lapis Lazuli and then Master Diamond to copy Lapis Lazuli to burn the opponent for a total of 3 times and at least 8,000 damage. The key was to spam the board with special summon monsters, which Gem Knights could do in abundance, especially with their then new Link 2 Gem Knight Phantom Quartz being able to search their fusion spell. Where Curious played the role was the simple matter of getting Block Dragon into the graveyard, as well as potentially milling some extra Earth monsters to summon that said Block Dragon out. Block Dragon was crucial for the obvious reason of getting different names to your hand, as well as serving as extra fusion material or link material to get extra bodies for more burn damage on board. Block Dragon is a very strong card on its own that in fact already has its own video from me, and Curious being yet another way to get into the grave made it a staple, because even though that was the only role it served in the deck, literally just spam out and mill or whatever, dump the Block Dragon, that's the only role it needed to have to be worthy of playing in the FTK deck. Curious would show up in countless Danger decks as well, and really I think every deck moving forward will mention Danger in some capacity, simply because Dangers and Curious are borderline the same archetype, you'd swear. Dangers all have the Dark attribute, but have 8 different types among them, and all can special summon themselves from your hand, which is everything that Curious needs. It's just Dark attribute, or the same attribute with different type, and an abundance of bodies. Danger Warrior decks would play this card due to its ability to help get any monster into the grave, often Destiny Hero Malicious, or even just a copy of Destrudo. Not to mention that Curious's Warrior typing does line up well enough, since once it gets into the graveyard, you can banish it for an extra copy of Phoenix Blade into your hand. And because Curious is of course that type of card, it shows up in plenty of other FTKs from this era as well. It was used in the Slash Draw FTK to help thin out the deck to get 4 cards out, ideally by sending a copy of Beast, milling 3, and then drawing 1, which really is getting rid of 5 cards when you think about it, but still, its ability to help manipulate the number of cards in your deck was crucial for the Slash Draw FTK to ensure that the card you would draw off Slash Draw would ultimately end up being a copy of Slash Draw. Beyond the FTKs, Curious would show up in plenty of decks, in part because Dangers continued to show up in plenty of decks. Thunder Dragon would play it, and I think is one of the earliest examples of the combo that would be borderline the face and name of Curious in the large scheme of the game, because Curious paired very well with another Link monster named Nightmare Griffin, to the point that I've even sampled this combo here, not because I don't own 3 copies of Curious, no, it's because it's for this part of the video. Because Curious can send any card, it became very commonplace to send a power trap card, something like Eradicator Epidemic Virus with Curious's effect, and then link off into Nightmare Griffin, and use its effect to discard a card and then set a spell or trap from your graveyard onto your field, which effectively made it a kill button against certain matchups, namely something like Sky Striker with all those spells could be very devastating, and if nothing else could let you search out a blowout floodgate for any other sort of matchup. If you were to call something like traps, it could also even stop counter decks that weren't as prominent, something like, say, Altergeist or True Draco, or something else that hinges on spells or traps. It could, of course, in a pinch, also send a Thunder Dragon name to get into the graveyard, or maybe a Dark Aura Light to get a Chaos monster in your hand live, but the main thing it was used for in Thunder decks, from what I've been able to find, was the search out a floodgate and just stun the opponent combo. Lunalike decks would also get to play it to help get their spell and traps into the graveyard, if not the tried and true search a floodgate type of shenanigans. Things like Lunalike Perfume or Serenade Dance had graveyard effects that players wanted to abuse. So once more, you could send them with Curious and then get your plays going as you worked your way to turbo out something like Azathoth to make sure that the opponent did not get the chance to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Warrior decks at this point in time would also adapt that same sort of shenanigans that Lunalike was doing, namely, Azathoth locks, but Curious could again now, on top of dumping Malicious, get you a floodgate, depending on what it is you wanted to do with your turn. Spiral decks do top occasionally, not infrequently with Curious from what I've been able to find, often playing the Danger cards. This time, it also has the benefit of being able to maybe get you a Spiral monster in the graveyard. Like maybe you gotta get that limited quick fix, or you send a copy of Rescue to use as an extender, or maybe Orchist would play it to get their Orchist names in the graveyard, or like Harpor or Symbol. Like these are plays they could make. And of course, it's still just that same damn Griffin. It's a lot of the Griffin combo going forward, and a number of decks play it, because if you play the Dangers, you can kind of just search Floodgate if you want to. And did I mention Imperial Order was still legal at this point in time? It's a very strong play and a very fucking annoying one. I will mention that Block Dragon Burning Abyss did play it to send a card that wasn't a floodgate more often than not. Once again, sending Block Dragon, not unlike Gem Knight did before it, because Block Dragon is just an insanely strong card in every deck it can be played in, and it was able to really be abused in BA to the best of its abilities. Block Dragon's on-field effect was also important in Block Dragon Burning Abyss, because I think the standard combo for the majority of builds was a Mech Knight Avramax to make it so that that's the only monster that can be attacked, and then a copy of Naturia Beast so the opponent can't activate spells, a copy of Fossil Dyna so that the opponent can't special summon, and a copy of Block Dragon to make it so that if they happen to have a normal summonable monster that could destroy your Fossil Dyna by card effect. They don't get to, because Block Dragon will protect rock monsters from being destroyed by card effects, because it's just an insanely stupid board. And a pretty wacky deck to watch. Don't know if I'd ever want to play against it, though. By this point in time, I think you can really take the clear run away from this card being played, but it does have one final home where it would see play before it inevitably got banned. That final home, of course, being Tearlament. Tearlament was a deck that was known to be a top-tier contender, if not the best deck of its format, even prior to the release of the Ishizu cards, even though that is now, of course, what the deck is most infamously known for, with its Tier 0 status. There was a time between the release of Power of the Elements and those Ishizu cards, however, where it was still only an incredibly strong Tier 1 threat. And during that time, Danger Tearlament was one of the best performing builds, if not the best performing build, which you can probably tell by now meant a free copy of Curious. Again, the play with Nightmare Griffin was an absolute staple if they so choose to, because you can main deck a copy of Eradicator and guaranteed get it going first, bar interruptions from hand traps, which is an insanely strong play. So that was absolutely a thing the deck could do, but even if you were doing that or just sending a tier name, the mill could also help to hit a tier name, which will send a Tearlament to the graveyard by card effect, triggering their effects to fusion summon. Meaning on top of searching a floodgate, you were also getting, the ball rolling for yourself, getting out a Kick Kalos, getting out a Rukala, getting out whatever it is you might happen to want to summon out. So it was an incredibly strong card in the Tearlament deck, and the obvious choice that was played right up until the release of the Ishizu cards, which is really funny to say for two reasons. One being that with the Ishizu cards, the deck had completely changed, both in terms of the main and extra, or, functionally changed to there being essentially one build. Either way, that core build did not play Curious, because they had dropped the Danger monsters, and the Ishizu monsters did way more than anything that the Dangers were doing. And because, most hilariously, once the Ishizu cards got out, this card got banned, or close enough. I think there was maybe a month. Either way, Konami saw fit to ban this card right after it fell out of the meta as a hit to the definitive best deck, the most recent Tier 0 as I'm making this video, and suffice it to say that was met with some very mixed reception. And by mixed reception, I mean almost everyone was annoyed by it, because it was a meaningless hit to a deck that had come way too late, and it was a hit to a deck that needed more hits, according to some, to not be so dominant in the meta. Also, it was really funny because my buddy playing Lightsworn at the time was like, it's another hit to Lightsworn, and that's correct. This is a hit to Lightsworn because it's a Lightsworn monster. It's not quite like when someone will be like, oh no, they hit Soul Charge, I can't believe they hit Infernity. It's like, no, they didn't hit Infernity because Infernity played a good card, they hit a good card. That's a pointless little nitpick of mine, but I felt like sharing. Regardless, it was banned, and as I make this video, it remains banned. I don't think, broadly speaking, its banning was really a bad thing, though. Curious was involved in plenty of FTKs, and like I've said, was most known for being a way to get out any floodgate that you want when comboed with Nightmare Griffin. And those two things being gone from the game aren't really anything I'm complaining about. Plus, Griffin itself is really another kind of floodgate effect, because it makes it so you can only activate effective monsters that have links pointing to this. So it's like, leaving all that behind is less annoying for me specifically, which means that it's good, and there's no bias in this video. But really, Curious's effect is one that's just waiting to be abused. Lavalval Chain is also banned as I'm making this video, and was also used in countless FTKs. And it also got Lightsworn players complaining when it got banned probably. So there's a lot in common with it, really, is what I'm getting to. Overall, Curious is a card I think we all knew was going to go at some point. Sending any monster card to the grave is an effect strong enough to be limited on Foolish Burial, let alone sending any card from the deck to the grave in an extra deck body, which can be accessed with much greater ease than a I'm aware of Thrust, but let's be real, broadly unsearchable normal spell card. Lavalval Chain is banned. I think it's understandable why you can figure out why this is banned too. As the Nightmare Griffin combo can show you, getting cards into graves by any means can have unintended side effects that can be really annoying if not broken to be playing against, and any card being in the graveyard is simply more accessible. And when coupled with something like the Danger monsters, which can spam the board with ease and make summoning a copy of Curious really a non-issue, it becomes very generic. And while the exact timing of its banning was less than ideal for some, you really don't hear many people clamoring for the card to come back. And I think that is for a reason. And so that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, Curious the Lightsworn Dominion. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review or what type of card you'd like to be. That's supposed to be what type of video you'd like to see, but whatever, we're just rolling with it. Don't forget to like, and as always, hit that subscribe button so that you too can impress your smoking Italian wife, and of course, so that you can immediately become a true duelist.